The night my son told me I had two choices: fall in line or find somewhere else to sleep. I didn't say a word. I just nodded slowly, the way you do when something confirms what you'd been suspecting for months but weren't ready to admit out loud. Then I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall for a long time. That was on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, I was gone. He called me 41 times before I answered. My wife, Barbara, passed away in the spring of 2019, pancreatic cancer. She was 58 years old and had never smoked a day in her life, never drank much, walked 2 miles every morning before I was even awake. The kind of person who does everything right and still loses. That's the part that stays with you. Not just that she's gone, but that there was no reason for it. No explanation that holds up under pressure. We had 2 kids. Our daughter Vivienne lives out in Denver with her husband. Our son Kyle is the one who called me 41 times. Kyle lives about 40 minutes south of where Barbara and I raised him, in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. Nice house. 4 bedrooms. 2-car garage. He married a woman named Stacy about 6 years ago, and they have a boy Theo, who just turned 4. Good kid. Quiet. Likes trains the way I used to like trains when I was his age, which made me feel something I don't have a word for every time I sat on the floor with him and pushed those little wooden engines around the track. After Barbara died, I stayed in the house we lived in for 22 years. I thought I needed to. I thought leaving would mean letting go of something I wasn't ready to let go of. But grief has a warping your sense of time, and before I knew it, 14 months had passed, and I was still eating cereal for dinner 4 nights a week, and talking to her photograph like she was going to answer me. It was Kyle who suggested I sell the house and move in with him and Stacy. He framed it the right way. Said Theo was growing up fast and didn't have much time with his grandfather. Said the commute I'd been doing to my part-time consulting work was too long for a man my age. I was 57 at the time, which isn't old, but grief adds years to you that don't show up on paper. He said the extra room was just sitting there. He said it would be good for all of us. I believed him. I want to be clear about that. I believed him completely, and I don't think he was lying when he said it. I think he meant it at the time. I think what he didn't understand was that there's a version of helpfulness that slides into something else once it becomes convenient. I sold the house in August, walked away with a little over $240,000 after everything was paid off, which I put into a money market account and left alone. I donated most of the furniture to a family from our old church who needed it, kept Barbara's chair, the reading chair she'd had since before we met, and a few boxes of photographs and her good cast iron skillet that I'd learned to cook with after she got sick. The spare room in Kyle's house was at the end of the hallway on the 2nd floor. It had a twin bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the backyard. It smelled like the carpet cleaner Stacy used, which was a particular brand that I never got used to. I set up Barbara's chair in the corner and put a photo of the 2 of us on the dresser, and told myself this was temporary. 3 months, maybe 6, just until I got my footing back. The first 2 weeks were fine. I made breakfast a few times, fixed the loose hinge on the back door that Kyle kept saying he'd get to. I took Theo to the park and pushed him on the swings for an hour, while he made the sound effects himself, because apparently, in his mind, the swings were a spaceship. I was useful. I felt useful. And for a man who had spent 14 months feeling invisible, useful felt very close to loved. That's the mistake I made. Right there, I mistook being needed for being wanted. The shift happened slowly enough that I didn't notice it happening. It started with dinner. Stacy worked long hours. She's a dental hygienist and had taken on extra shifts, and Kyle got home around 6, and Theo needed to be fed by 5:30, or he turned into something unrecognizable. So I started cooking dinner, not every night, just when it made sense. Then it was every night. Then it was every night, plus the grocery run on Tuesdays, because the store was near the park where I walked anyway, and it seemed logical. Then it was laundry on Wednesdays, because the machine was right there, and I had the time. I started keeping track of Theo's doctor's appointments in my phone, because Stacy said she could never keep the dates straight. I learned which pediatric clinic they used, which insurance card to bring, where to park. Nobody asked me to do any of this. That's the thing I kept telling myself. Nobody asked. I was just helping. I was just filling the hours. But somewhere in there, without anyone saying it out loud, it stopped being help and started being expected. I noticed it the first time I didn't make dinner. I'd driven over to my friend Al's house. We'd worked together for 20 years, and he was one of the few people who still called just to call. And we lost track of time playing cards, and I didn't get back until almost 7. I found Kyle standing in the kitchen looking at the empty stove, with an expression I recognized from when he was a teenager, and thought he was being subtle about his disappointment. He didn't say anything, he ordered pizza, but the silence between us that night had a texture to it that it hadn't had before. After that, I started leaving notes on the counter when I was going to be out. Not because anyone asked me to, because it felt like I needed to account for my time. I want you to understand what that means. I was 57 years old. I had spent 31 years running a regional logistics operation with 42 employees. I had raised 2 children and buried my wife. And I was leaving sticky notes on my son's kitchen counter, explaining where I was going and when I'd be back, like I was a teenager checking in with a curfew. I told myself it was considerate. I told myself I was being a good house guest. I was making myself small. That's what I was actually doing. I was shrinking down to take up less space, so nobody would get tired of me being there. Spring came. Kyle and Stacy started having people over more. Friends from the neighborhood, coworkers, a few couples they'd met at Theo's preschool. The house would fill up on Friday nights, and I'd usually find somewhere else to be. Went to the library, drove to see Al, sat in the parking lot of a coffee shop and read for 2 hours once, which tells you something about how I was starting to think of myself in that house. One night in April, Kyle came to find me around 4 in the afternoon. I was in the backyard helping Theo build something out of sticks and twigs. The kid had a serious engineering interest that I found genuinely wonderful, and Kyle stood in the doorway and said, "Hey Dad, can you do me a favor tonight?" I said sure. He said they were having the Delacroix family over, the neighbors from 3 houses down with the twins, and Stacy's sister was coming, and a few others, and they were going to do a cookout. He said he'd bought a pork tenderloin and some ribs, and he knew I'd been grilling since before he was born, and could I handle that? I said of course. He said great, and went back inside. I grilled for 2.5 hours in the May heat, marinated the ribs the way Barbara used to do, with the brown sugar and the apple cider vinegar, and a little smoked paprika. Made sure everything came off the grill at exactly the right time. Set it all out on the long folding table in the backyard, and watched everyone fill their plates. Stacy's sister came through the line and said, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible, who made this?" Kyle said, "Oh, the rib guy," and laughed, and some people laughed with him. The rib guy. Not my dad. Not, he used to grill like this every 4th of July when we were growing up. Just, the rib guy. Said like I was a service that had been contracted out. I stood by the grill for another hour and a half until most people had gone inside. Nobody introduced me. Nobody brought me a plate. I made one myself from what was left over. I sat at the far end of the table and ate alone while I could hear laughter drifting through the screen door. I went to bed that night and lay there in the dark and thought about Barbara's chair sitting in the corner of that little room. And I thought about the $240,000 sitting in that money market account. And I thought about Al asking me, just the week before, why I didn't get my own place. I didn't have a good answer for him then. I was starting to have one. What finally broke it wasn't one big thing. It was a Tuesday morning in June. I came downstairs at 7 to make coffee. I had been sleeping a little later than usual. I'd had a rough night, one of those nights where the absence of Barbara sits on your chest like something physical. And when I got to the hallway outside my room, I almost tripped over something on the floor. A laundry basket, full of Kyle's work clothes, dress shirts, slacks, a couple of ties, sitting directly outside my bedroom door with a post-it note on the handle that said, "Dad, dry cleaning pickup at Ridgemont Cleaners is Thursday. They have the account on file." I stood there for a minute looking at it. He hadn't asked. He hadn't knocked. He'd just set a basket of his clothes outside my bedroom door with instructions. I picked up the basket and carried it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. I poured my coffee and sat there and read the note again. They have the account on file. Like my job that day was obvious. Like it had been settled. Kyle came downstairs about 20 minutes later, already in his work shirt, and saw the basket on the table and looked at me. I said, "I saw these outside my door." He said, "Yeah, I need those by Thursday." I said, "I'm not sure I'm able to get to the dry cleaner this week." He looked at me the way adults look at a kid who's said something unreasonable. There was a pause. Then he said, "Dad, you're here all day. You don't have anything going on." I didn't argue. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, and went upstairs. I called Al that afternoon, told him about the basket. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "You know what? I actually know a guy who has a two-bedroom apartment opening up in my complex next month. Month to month. Clean place, good neighborhood, 5 minutes from the park where you walk." I asked him how much. He told me. I said, "Send me the number." I didn't say anything to Kyle or Stacy for 2 weeks. I let everything look exactly the same. Made dinner, took Theo to the park, picked up the dry cleaning, once, just that once, because I wasn't ready to explain myself yet, and I needed time to get my plan in order. I went and saw the apartment on a Wednesday afternoon. Second floor, corner unit, hardwood floors, a kitchen with enough counter space for my cast iron, a bedroom big enough for Barbara's chair, and a proper bed. A second room I could make into whatever I wanted, an office, a reading room, something that was just mine. The landlord said he could have it ready in 3 weeks. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. I started quietly packing. Not the way you pack when you're in a hurry, the way you pack when you're finally thinking clearly. A box here, a bag there. I moved things to my car over the course of several evenings, just a little at a time, so nobody noticed. The photographs. Barbara's chair, which I broke down and fit into my SUV on a Saturday while Kyle was at Theo's soccer practice and Stacy was running errands. By the time moving day came, there was almost nothing left in that little room. Just the twin bed, the dresser that belonged to them anyway, and the smell of that carpet cleaner. I left a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "Kyle, I've moved to my own place. I'll text you the address. I hope you and Stacy and Theo are well. I love you. Dad." I left my key on top of the note. I drove to my new apartment, carried in the last few boxes, and set Barbara's chair in the corner of the bedroom by the window, the way she always had it at home. I ordered a pizza. Half pepperoni, half mushroom, the way we used to do on nights when neither of us felt like cooking. And I sat in her chair and ate it, and watched the evening light come through the window and felt, for the first time in a long time, like I could breathe. My phone started ringing at around 8 o'clock that evening. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, and again. I watched Kyle's name come up on the screen, and I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter and finished my dinner. Over the next 9 days, Kyle called me 41 times. He texted. He texted Vivienne, who called me from Denver, sounding worried until I explained what had happened calmly and clearly, and then she was quiet for a moment and said, "Dad, I think I understand." Stacy called once and left a voicemail that began with, "I want you to know we never meant for you to feel unwelcome," which was interesting phrasing, because feeling unwelcome and being treated as staff are two different things, and I noticed she'd chosen the softer version. On the 10th day, I texted Kyle. I said, "I'm fine, I have my own place now and I'm doing well. When you're ready to talk, I'm here." He called within 60 seconds. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. He cried. My son, who I have seen cry maybe 6 times in his entire adult life. And I let him, and I didn't fill the silence the way I used to. There was a time when I would have rushed to comfort him, to say it was fine, to make it easier. I didn't do that this time. I waited and I listened, and when he was done I said, "I need you to hear me tell you something." He said, "Okay." I said, "When you left that laundry basket outside my bedroom door, without asking me, you weren't treating me like your father. You were treating me like someone who was there to be useful, and that's not why I came to stay with you. That's not what I thought we were building." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know, Dad, I know. We didn't fix everything in that phone call. That's not how it works. These things accumulate over months and they take months to work through, honestly." But something shifted. I could hear it in his voice. Not just the guilt, but something underneath it. A recalibration. I've lived in my apartment for almost 8 months now. It is, without exaggeration, one of the best decisions I have made in a long time. Al is 5 minutes away. We play cards on Thursday nights, and he gives me a hard time about my grilling, which means he has never actually eaten anything I've grilled. But I've stopped expecting consistency from Al, and it works out fine. I found a Thursday morning volunteer shift at the food bank 3 blocks from my building. I run the logistics of their weekly donation intake, which turns out is something a man with 30 years of supply chain experience is reasonably good at. I have a regular table at the coffee shop on Clement Street where I go most mornings and read for an hour before I do anything else. I walk. I cook real dinners for myself. I put Barbara's photograph on the bookshelf I built, actually built, with tools over a weekend. And I say good morning to her when I wake up, and it doesn't make me as sad as it used to, which I think is what she would have wanted. I see Theo every other Sunday. Kyle brings him over, and I make lunch. and we spend the afternoon doing whatever he wants to do, which right now involves an extremely detailed ongoing project, with model trains that I have become perhaps more invested in than a 57-year-old man ought to be. Theo calls the main engine Grandpa's train now, which I noticed Kyle heard and didn't say anything about, and I filed that away as a small, quiet step in the right direction. Kyle and I talk on the phone most weeks. It's not the same as it was before Barbara died. It's different, and I think different might actually be more honest. We're figuring out who we are to each other now that I'm not filling in where the family needed me to. That takes time. But here's what I want to say. The thing I didn't understand until I was sitting in Barbara's chair, in that little room, at the end of the hallway, feeling like I was disappearing. Loving your family and letting your family define your value are not the same thing. I spent 14 months after Barbara's death looking for a reason to still matter, and I looked for it in the wrong place. I looked for it in being useful to people who, in fairness, let me be, because I made it easy for them. The laundry basket outside the door was not the problem. It was just the moment I finally saw clearly what I had allowed to happen. I am not the rib guy. I am not the errand man. I am not the dry cleaning pickup on Thursdays. I'm a father, and a grandfather, and a man who knows how to build a bookshelf, and grill a rack of ribs and sit with a 4-year-old for an entire afternoon talking about trains. I am someone who loved a woman for 29 years and still talks to her photograph and doesn't apologize for that to anyone. I have a key to my own front door now, and nobody else has a copy unless I gave it to them. That's not a small thing. That turns out to be everything.